Marry me before sunset or you'll have nothing. Eleanor Shaw stood in the dust of an Arizona ranch, staring at a man she'd met an hour ago. Cole Mercer. Hardened, silent, dangerous, they said. Behind her lay ruins, debts that swallowed her life whole, betrayal that left her with nothing but the clothes on her back. Ahead, only this, a stranger's blunt proposal and a deadline measured in fading light. She was 45 years old, too old for fairy tales, too desperate to walk away. If you want to see how a woman bets everything on one brutal choice, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Let me see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of red dust, and Eleanor Shaw climbed down with legs that barely remembered how to hold her weight. 3 days of travel, 3 days of watching the green east fade into endless brown, watching trees surrender to scrub brush, and hope thin out like water and sand. She pressed one hand against the small of her back and winced. 45 wasn't old, but it wasn't young either, and the road had reminded her of every year. "Miss Shaw?" The voice came from her left, low, rough, like gravel under a boot heel. She turned and found herself looking at a man who stood too still to be comfortable. Tall, lean in the way working men get lean, all sinew and purpose. His hat brim shadowed most of his face, but she caught the line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. No smile, not even the pretense of one. "Mrs. Shaw," she corrected quietly. "Widow." Cole Mercer. He didn't offer his hand, just tipped his head toward a wagon 20 feet off. "That everything?" She glanced at the single trunk the driver was hauling down. Everything she owned in the world, crammed into wood and leather straps. "Yes." "Get in." "Not may I help you. Not welcome to Arizona. Just get in." Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something colder. She'd come too far to turn back now. She gathered her skirts, ignored the ache in her knees, and climbed into the wagon. Mercer loaded the trunk without a word. Then he swung up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses moved. The town, if you could call it that, disappeared behind them in minutes. A row of weathered buildings, a church with peeling paint, a saloon with no name. That was it. Eleanor watched it shrink and felt the weight of distance settle over her like a second skin. How far had she come? How far from everything she used to be? Philadelphia felt like another lifetime. "How long's the ride?" she asked. "Hour, maybe more. Maybe, I see." Silence dropped between them, heavy and uninvited. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap and kept her eyes forward. The land stretched out in every direction, flat and merciless under a sky too big to make sense of. No trees, no shade, just red earth and brittle grass and heat that pressed down like a hand. She'd known it would be hard. She'd known that when she answered the advertisement, seeking a woman of good character and sound mind for marriage of practical arrangement, must be willing to work. No romance, no illusions. Room, board, and security provided in exchange for partnership. Arizona territory. She'd read it 3 times before she understood what it really said. "I need help, and I'm too proud to beg." She'd written back the same day. Now here she was, sitting beside a stranger who hadn't looked at her once since they left town. A man whose advertisement had promised nothing but honesty, and delivered exactly that. "Are you always this quiet?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Mercer's jaw tightened. For a second, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Are you always this talkative?" Eleanor's mouth twitched despite herself. "Fair enough." They rode in silence after that, but it felt different somehow, like they'd drawn a line and agreed where it was. The sun slid lower, the shadows stretched longer, and finally, after what felt like years compressed into an hour, the ranch appeared. Eleanor had expected, she didn't know what. Something. Anything more than this. The house was small. 1 story, wood frame, windows that caught the dying light like tired eyes. The barn leaned slightly to the left, its roof patched in 3 places with mismatched planks. Fences zigzagged across the property in crooked lines, half the posts missing or rotted through. Beyond that, open land rolled away into nothing. It looked like a place where someone had tried and failed, Mercer pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. He sat there for a moment, hands still on the reins, staring at the house like it was something he had to brace himself for. "This is it," he said. "I see. It's not much." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's not." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, for the first time. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "You can still leave. I'll take you back to town. No hard feelings." She met his gaze and didn't blink. "And then what?" "Then you get on the next stage. Go back east. Find something better than this." "There's nothing back east." Her voice came out flat, stripped of everything but fact. "I lost my house. I lost my husband's business. I lost every cent to creditors, and a cousin who swore he'd invest it wisely. There is nothing. This—" She gestured at the ranch, the broken fences, the sagging barn. "This is more than I have." Something shifted in Mercer's expression. Not pity. She would have hated pity. Something closer to recognition, like he understood what it meant to stand at the edge of nothing and look back at worse. "All right, then." He climbed down and reached for her trunk. "Let's get you inside." Eleanor followed him up the porch steps. The boards creaked under her weight, loud in the stillness. Mercer pushed the door open and stepped aside. The interior was dim, lit only by the last fingers of daylight creeping through the windows. One main room served as kitchen, dining, and sitting area all at once. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom. Everything was clean. She noticed that immediately. Not tidy, but scrubbed. The floor, the table, the cook stove. Like someone had worked hard to make it decent and knew it still wasn't enough. Mercer set her trunk down near the wall. "Bedroom's through there. You'll take it." "And you?" "I'll sleep in the barn." "That's not—" "It's how it is." He cut her off without malice, just finality. "At least until we figure out what this is going to be." Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she say? That they were married, or about to be, and should share a bed like any couple? They both knew this wasn't that kind of marriage. Wouldn't be. Couldn't be. "All right," she said quietly. Mercer nodded. He moved to the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "There's a preacher coming at sunset. He'll do the ceremony, say the words, sign the paper. That's all it is." "I understand." "Do you?" He turned back, and for the first time she heard something like doubt in his voice. "Because once it's done, it's done. You'll be tied to this place, to me, to whatever comes with it. And there are things—" He stopped, shook his head. "There are things you don't know." Eleanor felt her pulse kick up, just once. "Then tell me." "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because if I do, you'll leave." He said it simply, like a fact. "And I need you to stay." The honesty of it hit her harder than any lie could have. He wasn't hiding the truth, he was delaying it, buying time, hoping she'd be in too deep to walk away when it finally came out. She should have been angry. She should have demanded answers right there, refused to go through with any of it until he laid everything bare. But Eleanor had learned something in the years since her husband died. Sometimes you had to step into the dark and trust you'd find the ground. "All right," she said again. Relief flickered across Mercer's face. Quick, barely there, gone. "I'll get the preacher." He left. Eleanor stood alone in the house that was about to become hers and tried to breathe evenly. Outside, the sun touched the horizon and began to bleed out across the sky. Red and gold and purple, too beautiful for a moment like this. She walked to the window and watched the light die. 45 years old. She'd been married before. She'd buried a husband she loved. She'd built a life and watched it collapse. And now here she was, about to marry a stranger because the alternative was oblivion. She wondered if she was brave or just broken. The door opened. Mercer stepped inside, followed by a small man in a dusty black coat. The preacher. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd done this before, and didn't enjoy it any more the second time. "Ma'am." He nodded to her. "I'm Reverend Dale. Mr. Mercer tells me you're ready to proceed." "I am." "You understand this is a legal marriage, binding in the eyes of the law and—" He hesitated. "And in the eyes of heaven." Eleanor almost laughed. Heaven had stopped watching her a long time ago. I understand. Very well. The Reverend opened a worn Bible and cleared his throat. Let us begin. The ceremony was brutal in its simplicity. No flowers, no music, no guests, just words stripped down to their barest form, spoken in a room going dark. Do you take this man? Do you take this woman, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death? Eleanor said, I do. Mercer said, I do. And it was done. The Reverend had them sign a paper. His handwriting was neat. Hers shook slightly. Mercer's was a harsh scrawl, like he'd learned to write holding a knife instead of a pen. Then the Reverend folded the document, tucked it into his coat, and left without another word. Silence filled the space he left behind. Eleanor stood on one side of the room. Mercer stood on the other, husband and wife, partners in survival, two people who knew almost nothing about each other, bound together by desperation and a piece of paper. I'll make supper, she said finally, because someone had to say something. There's not much. Some beans, salt pork, coffee. That's fine. She moved to the stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. Mercer watched her for a moment, then turned and walked out. She heard his boots on the porch, then nothing. Eleanor worked in the growing dark, lighting a lamp, stoking the fire, measuring out beans and water. The routine of it steadied her. Cooking was something she knew, something she could control. She let her mind go quiet and focused on the work. By the time the beans were soft and the pork sizzling, full night had fallen. She set 2 plates on the table and went to the door. Mercer? She called it softly, not sure if he was even still there. He emerged from the shadows near the barn, a dark shape against darker shapes. Yeah. Supper's ready. He came inside and sat without a word. Eleanor took the chair across from him and pushed a plate forward. They ate in silence. The food was plain, tasteless really, but she saw him clean his plate and felt a small, ridiculous flicker of satisfaction. It's good, he said quietly. It's beans. Still, he met her eyes. Thank you. Eleanor nodded. She wanted to ask him everything, about the ranch, about his past, about the things he wasn't telling her, but exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight, and she knew tonight wasn't the time. I should sleep, she said instead. Yeah. Mercer stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. Bedroom's yours. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. All right. She rose and moved toward the bedroom door, then hesitated. Mercer? He turned. What time do we start tomorrow? Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. Sunrise. I'll be ready. I know. Eleanor slipped into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. The room was small, just a bed, a dresser, a single window. She lit the lamp on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the mattress. It creaked under her weight, old but sturdy. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging her 2 dresses, setting out her hairbrush and the small tin of lavender soap she'd carried all the way from Philadelphia. Familiar things. Anchors in a strange place. When she finally lay down, she didn't expect to sleep. But the darkness took her fast and deep, and she dreamed of nothing at all. Eleanor woke to pale gray light creeping through the window and the sound of someone moving outside. She sat up, disoriented for half a second before memory crashed back. Arizona. The ranch. Mercer. Her husband. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress and pinned her hair back with practiced efficiency. 45 years meant she'd long since learned not to waste time on vanity. When she stepped out of the bedroom, the main room was empty, but she could smell coffee, strong and bitter. She poured herself a cup and stood at the window, watching the world come into focus. The land looked even harsher in daylight, all sharp edges and unforgiving space. She saw Mercer near the barn, already working. His shirt was off, hung on a fence post, and she could see the lean muscle of his back, the way he moved, efficient, practiced, no wasted motion. She also saw the scars, 3 of them, thick and raised, crossing his shoulder blades like someone had tried to write a message there and given up halfway through. Old scars, the kind that came from violence. Eleanor looked away and sipped her coffee. Not her business? Not yet. She finished the cup, washed it, and stepped outside. Mercer glanced up as she approached. Didn't expect you up this early. You said sunrise. Most people think that's a suggestion. I'm not most people. He almost smiled. No, I'm starting to see that. He gestured toward the barn. I'm fixing the stall gate. One of the horses kicked it loose last week. You know anything about carpentry? Enough not to hurt myself. Good enough. He handed her a hammer. Hold this steady while I nail it. They worked together in silence, Mercer positioning the boards, Eleanor bracing them while he drove nails home. The sun climbed higher, sweat beaded on her forehead, slid down her spine. Her arms ached. But she didn't complain, didn't ask for a break. She just held the wood and let him work. When the gate was fixed, Mercer stepped back and tested it. Solid. He nodded. That'll do. What's next? He looked at her for a long moment. You don't have to do this. Do what? Prove yourself. I know you're not afraid of work. You wouldn't be here if you were. Eleanor set the hammer down carefully. I'm not proving anything. I'm learning what needs to be done. If this is going to be my home, I need to know how to keep it running. Your home, Mercer repeated like he was testing the words. That's what we agreed to, isn't it? Yeah. He picked up his shirt and shrugged it on. Yeah, it is. They spent the rest of the morning on small repairs, fence posts that needed resetting, a water trough that had cracked, tools that needed sharpening. Mercer showed her where everything was kept, how things were done. He didn't talk much, but he was patient. When she made a mistake, he corrected it without making her feel stupid. By noon, Eleanor's hands were blistered and her back screamed, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Useful. They ate a quick meal, bread and cheese, more coffee, and then Mercer said, I need to check the north pasture. You can stay here if you want. I'll come. He didn't argue, just saddled 2 horses and helped her up. Eleanor hadn't ridden in years, but her body remembered. They rode out across the open land, and she tried not to think about how far the horizon was, how small she felt beneath the sky. The north pasture was a stretch of grassland bordered by low hills. Mercer dismounted and walked the fence line, checking for damage. Eleanor followed. This land, she said. It's yours? It will be. Once I pay off the bank. How much do you owe? He told her. The number made her stomach drop. That's a lot. Yeah. He crouched to examine a post. My father bought this place 30 years ago, spent his whole life trying to make it work. When he died, he left me the land and the debt. He straightened. I've been paying it down slow. Another 2 years, maybe 3, and it'll be mine free and clear. If nothing goes wrong, he agreed. Eleanor looked out at the land, dry, stubborn, beautiful in its harshness. She could see what it might become with enough work, enough time. She could also see how easily it could break you. Why marry me? She asked quietly. You could have hired someone, a hand, a housekeeper. Mercer was quiet for a long time. Then, I needed someone who wouldn't leave. A wife can leave. Not as easy. He met her eyes, and not for the same reasons. A hired hand leaves when the work gets hard or the pay gets thin. A wife. He stopped. Started again. I needed a partner, someone with skin in the game, someone who'd fight for this place because it was theirs too. That's all? That's enough. Eleanor nodded slowly. It made sense. Cold sense, but sense. And she could respect that. She'd answered his advertisement for the same reason, survival. Mutual need, no romance, no illusions, just 2 people trying not to drown. They rode back as the sun began its descent. Mercer took care of the horses while Eleanor started supper. She found potatoes in the cellar, an onion, a bit of dried beef. She made a stew that wasn't half bad. They ate together again. This time, Mercer asked her questions. Where was she from? How long had she been widowed? What did she know how to do? Eleanor answered honestly. Philadelphia, 5 years. She could cook, sew, manage household accounts. She'd helped her husband run his business before he died. Bookkeeping, correspondence, dealing with suppliers. She knew numbers. She knew people. You read and write? Mercer asked. Of course. Good. He pushed his empty bowl aside. I've got ledgers, books, I've been trying to keep track of expenses, income, what I owe, but I'm not, he grimaced. I'm not good with that kind of thing. Can you look at them? I can. He stood and retrieved a battered ledger from a shelf, set it in front of her. Eleanor opened it and immediately saw the problem. The entries were a mess, numbers scratched out, rewritten, sometimes illegible, dates out of order, no clear system. She flipped through pages and felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just disorganized, it was chaos. Mercer, she said carefully, when was the last time you balanced this? Never. Never? I just write down what I spend, what comes in. I figure as long as I've got more coming in than going out, I'm fine. Eleanor closed the ledger and took a slow breath. You have no idea how much you actually owe, do you? His jaw set. I know what the bank says. The bank says what you borrowed, but interest, late fees, compounding, do you know how any of that works? No. Then you don't know what you owe. She opened the ledger again and started scanning entries. This says you paid the bank $50 in January. Is that right? I think so. You think so? I'm not good with this. The words came out sharp, frustrated. Mercer stood and paced to the window, his back to her. I can work. I can fix things. I can build and break and keep this place running, but numbers, words on paper, they don't make sense to me. Never have. Eleanor watched him, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched, and she understood. This was what he'd been afraid to tell her. Not violence, not danger, just this. He couldn't read well enough to run his own ranch. Sit down, she said quietly. He didn't move. Mercer, sit down. He turned and met her eyes, waiting for judgment, waiting for her to tell him he was a fool. I can fix this, Eleanor said instead. He blinked. What? Your books. I can fix them. I can organize them, balance them, figure out exactly what you owe and when. I can handle all of it. She tapped the ledger. This is what I'm good at. Let me do it. Mercer stared at her like she'd just offered him something he didn't know how to take. You do that? We're partners, aren't we? You run the land, I'll run the numbers. She paused. Unless you don't trust me with it. It's not that. Then what? He shook his head. I didn't expect you to be this good at it. Eleanor almost laughed. You didn't expect me to be good at anything. No. I expected you to be desperate enough to marry me. I didn't expect you to be... He stopped. What? More than I bargained for. The words hung between them, strange and careful. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction, exactly. Something else. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of it. I'll start on the books tomorrow, she said. All right. Mercer moved toward the door. I'll be in the barn. Mercer? He paused. Thank you, Eleanor said. For being honest. About the books. About needing help. A lot of men wouldn't have been. He nodded once, then disappeared into the night. Eleanor sat alone with the ledger and felt, for the first time since arriving, like she might actually belong here. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Mercer worked the land. Eleanor worked the books. In the mornings, they tackled repairs together. She was getting better with the hammer, faster with the knots. In the afternoons, she sat at the table with the ledger and a pot of coffee and tried to make sense of years of financial chaos. It was worse than she'd thought. Mercer owed the bank more than he knew. Late fees had compounded. Interest had ballooned. If she was reading the documents correctly, and she was, he was 3 months from losing everything. She didn't tell him. Not yet. Not until she had a plan. On the 4th day, a rider appeared on the horizon. Eleanor saw him from the window and felt her pulse quicken. Visitors out here weren't casual. Mercer walked out to meet him. The man was older, thick around the middle, wearing a coat too heavy for the heat. They talked. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she could see Mercer's posture change. Shoulders squaring, hands clenching. When the man finally rode off, Mercer stood in the yard for a long time, staring at nothing. Eleanor stepped outside. Who was that? Roark's man. Who's Roark? Mercer turned to look at her. Trouble. What kind of trouble? He hesitated. Then, like he was pulling teeth, Victor Roark owns most of the land around here. Cattle baron, rich, connected. He's been trying to buy this place for years. Why? The north pasture. Mercer gestured toward the hills. There's water up there, a spring that runs year-round. Without it, his herds can't graze the eastern range. With it, he shrugged. He'd control everything from here to the mountains. Eleanor felt cold despite the heat. What did his man want? Same thing they always want. Made me an offer. How much? Mercer told her. It was more than she'd expected, more than enough to pay off the bank and walk away with money in pocket. Are you going to take it? She asked. No. Why not? Because it's not about the money. Mercer's voice was flat, hard. My father died trying to hold on to this land. He fought Roark for 30 years. I'm not giving it up now. Eleanor studied him. Even if it ruins you? Even then. She should have argued, should have pointed out that pride was expensive and stubbornness didn't pay debts. But she looked at his face and saw something she recognized. A man who'd drawn his line and wouldn't cross it, no matter what it cost. She knew that feeling. She'd lived it when she'd buried her husband and refused to let his creditors take his name along with his money. All right, she said quietly. Mercer blinked. All right? It's your land, your decision. She turned toward the house. But if we're going to fight Roark, we need to know exactly what we're fighting for. I'll have the books balanced by tomorrow. Then we'll know where we stand. She left him standing in the yard and went back to work. That night, she stayed up late, candle burning low, working through numbers until her eyes blurred. She cross-referenced payments, calculated interest, projected what they'd owe month by month. And when she finally set the pencil down, she knew 3 things. 1, Mercer was closer to losing the ranch than he realized. 2, Roark's offer was high because he knew Mercer was desperate. 3, if they were smart, if they cut expenses, sold off some equipment, worked twice as hard, they might be able to hold on. It was a long shot, but Eleanor had bet on worse. She closed the ledger and allowed herself a small, grim smile. Then she blew out the candle and went to bed. The days blurred together after that. Work, numbers, work. Eleanor threw herself into both with a focus that surprised even her. She reorganized the household expenses, found ways to stretch supplies, negotiated better prices with the suppliers in town. Turned out men were willing to bargain when a well-spoken woman asked politely instead of a taciturn rancher grunting orders. Mercer noticed. He didn't say much, but she caught him watching her sometimes, like he was trying to figure out who she really was. 2 weeks after the wedding, Eleanor was in town picking up supplies when she overheard 2 women talking outside the general store. That's her, one whispered. The one who married Cole Mercer. Poor thing. Does she know? Know what? About the fire. About what he did. Eleanor's eyes stilled on the flour sack she was loading. She kept her face neutral, didn't turn around. I heard he killed a man, the first woman said. More than one, I'd wager. You don't get a reputation like his without blood on your hands. She seems respectable. Wonder what she was running from to end up with him. Eleanor finished loading the wagon, paid the clerk, and left without acknowledging the women. But their words followed her all the way back to the ranch. That evening, she found Mercer in the barn, mending harness leather. I heard something in town today, she said without preamble. His hand stopped. Yeah? About a fire, and a man you killed. Mercer set the leather down slowly. What exactly did you hear? Not much, just whispers, but enough to know there's a story you haven't told me. He stood and walked past her, out into the yard. Eleanor followed. The sun was setting again. Seemed like every important conversation they had happened at sunset, like the dying light made honesty easier. My father built a house on the north pasture, Mercer said finally. 20 years ago, right by the spring. He was going to move us up there, run cattle year-round. It was going to be the thing that made this place work. Eleanor waited. Roark didn't want that. Didn't want us controlling the water, so one night, the house burned. Mercer's voice was flat, empty. My father was inside. He got out, but barely, burns all over his body. He lived another year, suffered every day of it. And the fire wasn't an accident, Eleanor said quietly. No. You're sure? I'm sure. He turned to face her. I found the lantern they used, found the tracks leading back to Roark's land, and I found the man who did it. Eleanor's stomach tightened. What did you do? I beat him half to death and told him if he ever came back, I'd finish the job. Mercer's eyes were dark, distant. He left town the next day. Never saw him again. But people talked, said I was violent, dangerous, said I'd killed him and hid the body. Did you? No, but I thought about it. He met her gaze. Every day since, I've thought about it. Eleanor absorbed this. A man who'd lost his father to greed and fire, who'd taken justice into his own hands because the law wouldn't, who'd lived with the weight of it ever since. Is that why you're so determined to keep this place? She asked. Partly. Mercer looked out at the land. It's also the only thing I've got left of him, the only thing that proves he existed, that he tried. I can't let Roark win. Eleanor nodded slowly. She understood that too. Legacy, proof, the need to make suffering mean something. All right, she said. Mercer frowned. All right? I married you knowing you had secrets. Now I know one of them. It doesn't change anything. It should. Why? Because you defended your family? Because you didn't let someone get away with murder? Eleanor shook her head. I've seen men do worse for less. At least you had a reason. He stared at her like she'd just said something impossible. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Some people are. I'm not some people. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. No, you're really not. They stood together in the fading light, two people bound by paper and circumstance, beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something more than survival. But Eleanor also understood something else. Roark wasn't done. Men like him never were. And the fight they were in was just beginning. She looked at the land, at the ranch that was becoming hers, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. Let Roark come. Let him try. She'd lost everything once before. She wasn't losing it again. Not without a fight. The morning after Mercer told her about the fire, Eleanor woke with a plan half-formed in her mind. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face, and was at the table with the ledger before the sun fully cleared the horizon. Mercer came in from the barn smelling like hay and leather. He stopped when he saw her hunched over the books, pencil moving fast across the page. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. Eleanor didn't look up. I kept thinking about the numbers. Find something. Maybe. She tapped a column of figures. You've been selling cattle to the stockyard in town, right? When I have any to sell. What do they pay per head? He told her. Eleanor's pencil scratched faster. That's terrible. It's what everyone gets. It's what everyone accepts, she corrected. There's a difference. She looked up at him. What if we bypass the stockyard entirely? Sold directly to buyers in Tucson or Phoenix? Mercer frowned. That's a 3-day drive, maybe 4 depending on the herd. But the price is nearly double, and the cost of the drive eats most of that difference. Not if we plan it right, not if we pool resources with other ranchers, share the expense. Eleanor could see it taking shape, the way she used to see business opportunities when her husband was alive. How many ranchers around here are struggling the same way you are? Most of them. Then talk to them. Organize a collective drive, split the costs, share the profits. Everyone wins. Mercer sat down slowly, staring at her like she'd just spoken a foreign language. You've been here 3 weeks and you're already trying to reorganize the entire cattle trade? I'm trying to keep us from losing everything. Eleanor met his eyes. You said you've got 2, maybe 3 years before the bank takes this place. I've gone through every entry in this ledger twice. You don't have 3 years. You have 8 months. Maybe 9 if we're lucky. The color drained from Mercer's face. That's not... It's the truth. Your father's debt is bigger than you thought, and the interest has been compounding faster than you've been paying it down. She softened her voice just slightly. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help. But we need to do something different, or we're going to lose. Mercer stood and walked to the window. His shoulders were tense, his hands braced against the frame like he needed something solid to hold on to. Eleanor watched him and felt a pang of something she didn't want to name. Sympathy, maybe. Or worse, she was starting to care whether this man succeeded or failed. "All right," he said finally. "I'll talk to the other ranchers, see if anyone's interested." "Good." "But Eleanor," he turned to face her, "if this doesn't work, then we'll try something else." She closed the ledger with a snap. "I didn't come all this way to watch you give up." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're stubborn. So are you." "Yeah, I guess we're matched that way." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Eleanor felt the air between them change. Not romantic, nothing like that, but something was building, a partnership that went deeper than paper, a shared determination that was starting to feel like trust. Mercer grabbed his hat. "I'll ride out after breakfast. Talk to the Hendersons first. They've got a good-sized herd. Take your time. Do it right." He nodded and left. Eleanor poured herself more coffee and went back to the books. There was still so much to untangle, so many ways this could go wrong. But for the first time since arriving, she felt like they had a chance. She worked through the morning, losing herself in numbers and projections. It was almost noon when she heard horses approaching. She went to the window and saw 3 riders coming up the road. They weren't traveling fast, but there was something deliberate about the way they moved. Something that made her stomach tighten. Eleanor stepped outside. The riders stopped about 20 feet from the house. The man in front was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from expensive stone. He wore a suit, a real suit, tailored and clean, and sat his horse like a man who'd never done a day's hard labor in his life. "Good afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was smooth, cultured. "I'm looking for Cole Mercer." "He's not here." Eleanor kept her voice level. "Can I help you?" "And you are?" "His wife." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, I'd heard he'd married. Victor Roark." He didn't dismount, just studied her from his saddle like she was a piece of property he was considering. "You're not what I expected." "I rarely am." That got a laugh out of him. Genuine, but not particularly warm. "I like that. Direct. Most women out here simper and apologize for existing." He leaned forward slightly. "Your husband and I have been having a conversation for some time now about this land. I assume you know about my offer." "I do." "And?" "And it's his decision, not mine." "But you have influence, surely." "A wife always does." Roark smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a reasonable man, Mrs. Mercer. I'm willing to be generous, more than generous, in fact. I'll add another 1,000 to my original offer. That's enough to pay off the bank, set you and your husband up somewhere comfortable. Maybe back east, where a woman like you belongs." Eleanor felt anger spike in her chest, hot and sudden. "A woman like me? Educated, refined. This..." He gestured at the ranch, the land, everything. "This isn't a life for someone with your sensibilities." "You don't know anything about my sensibilities." "Don't I?" Rourke's voice turned colder. "I know you married a man with a violent past and a failing ranch. I know you're smart enough to see this place is dying, and I know that when the bank comes calling, which they will, very soon, you'll wish you'd taken my offer." Eleanor stepped off the porch, moving closer. Not close enough to be threatening, but close enough to make sure he heard every word. "Mr. Roark, I appreciate the visit, but the answer is no. It was no when your man came 2 weeks ago. It's no now, and it'll be no the next time you ask." Rourke's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake. That's my right. It's foolish. Maybe, but it's mine." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Rourke straightened in his saddle and tipped his hat again, the gesture mocking this time. "I'll leave you to your foolishness then. But Mrs. Mercer..." He paused. "Men like your husband don't win fights against men like me. They just make the losing longer and more painful for everyone involved." He turned his horse and rode off, his 2 men following. Eleanor stood in the yard and watched them disappear into the distance. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together and forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly. By the time Mercer came back that evening, she'd steadied herself. But the moment he walked in and saw her face, he knew something had happened. "What's wrong?" Roark came by. Mercer's jaw clenched. What did he want? The same thing he always wants. He upped his offer, tried to convince me to persuade you to sell. What did you tell him? No. Mercer set his hat down carefully. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. This is my home too now. I'm not letting him take it. He looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Gratitude, maybe, or respect. The Hendersons are in, he said quietly. So are the Pratts and the Jamesons. We've got enough cattle for a decent drive. If we leave in 2 weeks, we can make Tucson before the buyers head north for the season. Eleanor felt relief wash over her. That's good. It's a start. Mercer moved to the stove and poured coffee. But Eleanor, you need to understand, Roark isn't going to stop. He's been trying to get this land for 30 years. He's not going to let us slip away just because we're working harder. Then we'll work smarter too. It's not that simple. It never is. Eleanor sat down at the table. But we're not giving up. So what's he going to do? Send more men? Make more threats? Maybe. Mercer's voice was dark. Or maybe he'll do what he did to my father. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt cold despite the warmth of the room. You think he'd try to burn us out? I don't know, but I'm not taking chances. He set his cup down. Starting tomorrow, one of us stays here at all times. No exceptions. And I'm going to talk to the sheriff. Will he help? Mercer's laugh was bitter. The sheriff's been in Roark's pocket for years, but I'll make sure there's a record. So if something happens, people know where to look. Eleanor nodded. They were preparing for war. A quiet war, fought with lawyers and ledgers and carefully documented threats. But war, nonetheless. That night she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. She thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd left behind. She'd been comfortable there once. Safe. Or at least she'd felt safe until her husband died and the world proved her wrong. Now she was here, married to a stranger, fighting a battle she didn't fully understand against a man who had more money and power than she could imagine. It was insane. Reckless. Everything her younger self would have warned against. But her younger self had never lost everything, had never stood at the edge and looked back at nothing. Eleanor closed her eyes and let sleep take her. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mercer and the other ranchers gathered cattle, planned routes, arranged supplies. Eleanor managed the books, calculated costs, negotiated prices with merchants who were suddenly much more interested in doing business now that she represented multiple ranchers instead of just one. She also started asking questions. Casual questions dropped into conversations at the general store or the post office. Questions about Roark, about his business, about how he'd built his empire. People were surprisingly willing to talk once they realized she was genuinely listening. What she learned didn't comfort her. Roark had started with nothing 40 years ago and built his fortune through a combination of shrewd deals and ruthless elimination of competition. Ranchers who wouldn't sell to him found their water sources mysteriously fouled. Businessmen who challenged him lost their credit. Politicians who opposed him lost their positions. He never got caught, never left enough evidence to prove anything. But everyone knew. He's like a spider, one old woman told Eleanor over tea. Sits in the middle of his web and waits for you to make a wrong move. Then he wraps you up slow. Eleanor thanked her for the tea and walked home with that image stuck in her head. A spider. Waiting. The day before the cattle drive, Mercer was out checking fences when Eleanor found something in the ledger that made her blood run cold. A notation, barely legible, dated 3 months before her arrival. Payment to bank, delayed. Extension granted. Fee, North Pasture water rights pending. She read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Then she grabbed her shawl and went to find Mercer. He was repairing a gate near the eastern boundary. She walked up and held out the ledger, open to the page. What does this mean? Mercer glanced at it and his face went carefully blank. Where did you find that? In the back. Under entries from last spring. Eleanor's voice was tight. What does it mean, Mercer? Did you promise the bank the water rights? Not promise, just... He set down his tools. I needed more time. The bank wouldn't give it to me unless I offered collateral. The water rights are the only thing keeping Roark from getting everything he wants. If the bank forecloses, they get the rights. I know. Mercer's voice was flat. I didn't have a choice, Eleanor. I was 3 days from losing the whole place. At least this way, I bought time. Time to do what? Dig the hole deeper? Time to figure something out. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Eleanor felt betrayal burn in her chest. Not because he'd made the deal, she understood desperation, but because he hadn't told her, because she'd been working for 2 weeks to save something that might already be lost. You should have told me, she said quietly. I know. Before I married you, before I invested everything in this place. I know. Mercer looked away. I'm sorry. Eleanor wanted to scream, wanted to throw the ledger at him and walk away, but she'd learned a long time ago that anger without action was just noise. How long do we have? She asked instead. 6 months. Maybe 8 if we make the payments on time. And if we don't? Then Roark gets the water and we get nothing. Eleanor closed the ledger and took a slow breath. All right. Mercer frowned. All right. We have 6 months. The cattle drive will help. If we're smart, if we work hard, maybe we can pay down enough to renegotiate. Maybe we can buy back the collateral before it's too late. You're not leaving? The question caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw fear beneath the stoic mask. Fear that she'd walk away, that he'd lose the one thing that was actually helping him fight. No, Eleanor said. I'm not leaving. But you don't lie to me again. About anything. Understood? Understood. Good. She turned to walk back to the house, then stopped. Mercer? Yeah? We're going to win this, not because we're lucky, not because Roark makes a mistake, but because we're going to fight smarter and harder than he expects. You hear me? Something that might have been hope flickered across his face. I hear you. Eleanor walked back to the house and went straight to the books. If they had 6 months, she needed to know exactly where every cent was going and where every cent could come from. She worked until her eyes burned and her hand cramped. When Mercer came in for supper, she had a new plan sketched out. Tighter budget. Specific targets. Clear goals for each month. Can we do this? He asked, looking at her projections. We have to. They ate in silence, both lost in thought. But when Eleanor went to bed that night, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. The fight was harder than she'd realized. The stakes were higher. But at least now she knew the whole truth, and she could work with the truth. The cattle drive left at dawn. Eleanor stood in the yard and watched the herd move out, Mercer riding point with Henderson and Pratt flanking. Dust rose in thick clouds. The sound of lowing cattle and shouting men filled the air. Then they were gone, swallowed by distance and morning light. Eleanor went back inside and looked at the empty house. 4 days, maybe 5. She'd be alone until they got back. She spent the first day reorganizing the pantry and taking inventory. The second day, she rode into town and paid bills, negotiated a better rate on feed, and listened to gossip. The third day, she worked on the books and wrote letters to potential buyers in Phoenix, trying to line up future sales. The fourth day, Roark came back. She was in the garden. She'd started one the week before, just vegetables, something to stretch the food budget, when she heard horses. 3 riders again. But this time Roark stayed mounted while his 2 men dismounted and started walking toward the barn. Eleanor straightened and called out, "This is private property." Roark smiled. "Just having a look around, Mrs. Mercer. Making sure everything's in order." "Everything's fine. You can leave." "In a moment." He nodded to his men. They kept walking. Eleanor's heart hammered. She was alone. No neighbors close enough to hear her scream. No weapon except the garden spade in her hand. But she'd be damned if she let them see her afraid. She walked toward them, holding the spade low but ready. "I said leave." One of the men laughed. "Or what, lady? You gonna dig us a hole?" "If I have to." The other man reached for the barn door. Eleanor moved fast, faster than she'd known she could. She swung the spade and cracked him across the knuckles. He yelped and stumbled back. "You crazy—" "I'm protecting my property. Get out." Rourke's voice cut through the tension. Enough! His men stopped. Eleanor stood her ground, breathing hard, spade raised. Roark looked at her with something like amusement. You've got spirit, Mrs. Mercer. I'll give you that. He turned his horse. But spirit doesn't pay debts. Remember that when the bank comes calling. He rode off. His men followed, one of them cradling his hand and shooting her venomous looks. Eleanor waited until they were out of sight, then lowered the spade. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She went inside, locked the door, and sat at the table until her breathing steadied. Then she loaded Mercer's rifle. He'd shown her how before he left, and kept it close. Mercer came back late the next day, exhausted and covered in trail dust. The moment he walked in and saw her face, he knew. What happened? She told him. Everything. The men, the barn, sir, the spade. Mercer's expression went dark and dangerous. He touched you? No, but they tried to go through the barn. I stopped them. With a spade. It was all I had. He looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not just respect, something fiercer, something that looked almost like pride. You could have been hurt. I wasn't. Eleanor, I'm fine, Mercer, and we got bigger problems. She gestured to the table. Sit down. Tell me how the drive went. He sat. The drive had gone well, better than expected. They'd sold the cattle for nearly double the local price, just like Eleanor predicted. After splitting costs with the other ranchers, Mercer had enough to make 3 months of payments to the bank. It wasn't enough to buy back the water rights, but it was a start. We do this again in 6 months, Eleanor said, doing quick calculations, and we cut expenses by another 20%. We might be able to clear enough to renegotiate. And if we can't, then we find another way. Mercer leaned back and rubbed his face. He looked older suddenly, worn down by years of fighting alone. I don't know how you do it. Do what? Stay so sure, so focused. I've been fighting this for 10 years and I'm tired, Eleanor. I'm so damn tired. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. The gesture surprised them both, but she didn't pull away. You're not alone anymore, she said quietly. That's the difference. He looked at their hands, then at her face. Why are you doing this? Really? You could leave. Take your share of the drive money and go anywhere. Start over somewhere easier. I already started over. Here. Eleanor squeezed his hand once, then pulled back. Besides, I'm stubborn, remember? I don't like losing. Neither do I. Then we won't. They sat in the growing dark, two people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something else. Partners. Allies. Maybe, eventually, something more, but that was a thought for another day. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of dust and distance, and somewhere out there, Victor Roark was planning his next move. But so was Eleanor Shaw Mercer, and she was done being afraid. The weeks that followed the cattle drive settled into a pattern that felt almost normal. Almost. Eleanor kept the books balanced to the penny, stretched every dollar until it screamed, and made the ranch run leaner than it ever had. Mercer worked sunup to sundown, fixing what was broken and maintaining what wasn't. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd learned to read each other's rhythms. But underneath the routine, tension coiled tight. Roark had gone quiet, and that worried Eleanor more than his threats ever had. Quiet men were planning. Quiet men were dangerous. She was hanging laundry one afternoon in late October when she saw dust rising on the north road. Not riders this time. A wagon. She shaded her eyes against the sun and watched it approach, her stomach already tightening with unease. The wagon pulled up near the house, and a man in a dark suit climbed down. He was thin, sharp-featured, carrying a leather satchel that looked expensive. Eleanor didn't need to ask who he was. Bankmen had a look about them. Mrs. Mercer? He removed his hat. I'm Howard Sykes, from the First Bank of Prescott. I know who you are, Mr. Sykes. My husband's in the north pasture. I can fetch him if... Actually, I'd prefer to speak with you. Sykes smiled, but it didn't warm his face any. May we talk inside? Every instinct Eleanor had screamed at her to say no, but refusing a bank representative wouldn't make the problem go away. She led him into the house and gestured to the table. Coffee? No, thank you. This won't take long. Sykes opened his satchel and pulled out several documents. I'm here to discuss your husband's loan status. We made the last payment on time. I have the receipt. Oh, the payments are current. That's not the issue. He laid out a document and turned it so she could read it. The issue is the collateral agreement Mr. Mercer signed in June. The water rights to the North Pasture Spring. Eleanor's throat went dry. What about them? The bank has decided to exercise our option to transfer those rights immediately. You can't do that. The agreement gives us 6 more months. The agreement gives us the option to accelerate if we determine the borrower represents an unacceptable risk. Sykes folded his hands. And I'm afraid recent events have led us to that determination. What recent events? Your husband's involvement in organizing a collective cattle drive that bypassed local stockyards. His ongoing conflict with Mr. Roark, one of our most valued clients. The general instability of, that's nonsense and you know it. Eleanor kept her voice level, but anger burned hot in her chest. The cattle drive was legal, profitable. We paid you 3 months ahead of schedule because of it. Nevertheless, the bank's position is clear. Sykes pulled out another document. We're transferring the water rights to Mr. Victor Roark, who has generously offered to purchase them at fair market value. The proceeds will be applied to your husband's remaining debt. Eleanor stared at the paper. The numbers swam. This is Roark's doing. This is the bank's decision. Roark owns the bank. Everyone knows it. Sykes's smile went thin and cold. I'd be careful making accusations like that, Mrs. Mercer. Slander is a serious matter. He stood and gathered his documents. You have 30 days to vacate the North Pasture and cease any use of the spring. After that, Mr. Roark's claim takes full effect. We'll fight this. You're welcome to try, but I'd encourage you to consider your position carefully. Mr. Roark has made a very generous offer to purchase the remainder of your property, enough to clear your debt and leave you with a fresh start elsewhere. He paused at the door. Some fights aren't worth winning, Mrs. Mercer. Sometimes the smart thing is to know when you're beaten. He left. Eleanor sat at the table and stared at nothing, her mind racing. 30 days. Roark would have the water, and without it, the ranch couldn't sustain cattle year-round. Everything they'd worked for, everything Mercer's father had died trying to build, gone. She heard Mercer's horse before she saw him. He must have spotted the wagon from the pasture and come back. He walked in, took one look at her face, and went still. What happened? Eleanor told him. Every word, every detail. She watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to fury so pure it seemed to burn the air between them. They can't... He stopped, started again. That money was supposed to buy us time. Roark bought them instead. Eleanor's voice was flat. Sykes as good as admitted it. They're calling us a risk so they can accelerate the transfer. Mercer turned and drove his fist into the doorframe. The wood cracked. Eleanor flinched but didn't speak. She understood the need to hit something when words wouldn't hold the rage. He's taking everything, Mercer said quietly. Blood dripped from his knuckles. Just like he took it from my father. Not yet he hasn't. Eleanor, I mean it. She stood and moved to face him. We have 30 days. That's time to find a way out. There is no way out. Without the water, this place is worthless. Then we make it worth something anyway. Eleanor's mind was already working, turning over possibilities. We contest the transfer, file a legal challenge. With what money? We just made 3 months of payments. We're broke. Then we find a lawyer who works on contingency, someone who hates Roark as much as we do. Mercer looked at her like she was speaking another language. You think someone like that exists? Everyone has enemies, even Roark. Eleanor moved to the shelf where she'd been keeping correspondence. I've been writing to buyers in Phoenix. One of them mentioned a lawyer there who specializes in land disputes, a man named Thomas Garrett. Supposed to be good. Supposed to be expensive. Not if he thinks he can win. Eleanor found the letter and held it up. I'm going to Phoenix. I'm going to talk to him. That's a 2-day ride each way, maybe more. Then I'll be gone 4 days. Eleanor, you can't just... Watch me. She met his eyes. You said you needed someone who wouldn't quit, someone who'd fight. That's what I'm doing. Fighting. Mercer stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in his expression shifted. Not quite hope, but not quite defeat either. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. I'll get the wagon ready. Eleanor shook her head. Horses faster. I'll ride. You haven't ridden that distance before. Then I'll learn. She moved past him to the bedroom. I need to pack. That night, Eleanor went through her trunk and pulled out the one good dress she still owned. Black silk, slightly worn at the seams, but still respectable. She'd need to look like someone worth listening to when she met this lawyer. Worth believing. She also pulled out the small velvet pouch she kept hidden at the bottom. Inside were her wedding ring from her first marriage and a pair of pearl earrings her mother had given her, the only things of value she had left. If the lawyer wouldn't take the case on contingency, maybe these would convince him. Mercer knocked on the doorframe. Can I come in? It's your house. It's yours too. He stepped inside and held out his bandaged hand. I wanted to say thank you for doing this, for trying. Don't thank me yet. I might come back empty-handed. I don't think you will. He hesitated. Eleanor, if something happens while you're gone, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, if Roark tries something, then you defend this place the same way I defended it with the spade. Eleanor looked at him steadily. We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever. Mercer nodded slowly. I'll keep the rifle loaded. Good. He started to leave, then stopped. Eleanor, when you get back, when this is over, I want to talk. About us. About what this is becoming. Her heart kicked once, hard. What do you mean? I mean, this stopped being just a business arrangement a long time ago. For me, at least. He met her eyes. I don't know what it is yet, but it's more than I expected. More than I probably deserve. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she was ready to say anything, so she just nodded. Mercer left. Eleanor sat on the bed and pressed her hands to her face. She'd come here expecting nothing. A roof. Food. Survival. She hadn't expected to care about this place. Hadn't expected to care about him. But she did. And that complicated everything. She left before sunrise, while the world was still gray and uncertain. Mercer had saddled the horse and packed supplies. Water, jerky, a bedroll, the rifle strapped to the saddle. He helped her mount without a word, then stepped back. 4 days, Eleanor said. I'll be here. She rode out into the dark, following the road by feel more than sight. As the sun rose, the land opened up around her, vast and empty and beautiful in its harshness. She'd grown to love this place, she realized, the way it didn't pretend to be anything but what it was. The ride to Phoenix took 2.5 days. Eleanor pushed hard, stopping only to rest the horse and grab a few hours of sleep. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed, but she kept moving. Phoenix was bigger than she'd expected, louder, full of people who moved with purpose and noise. She found a boarding house, paid for a room, and cleaned up as best she could. Then she asked directions to Thomas Garrett's office. The building was modest but well kept, tucked between a general store and a barber. Eleanor climbed the stairs and found herself in a small waiting area with 2 chairs and a desk where a young man sat writing. Help you, ma'am? I need to see Mr. Garrett. It's urgent. Do you have an appointment? No, but I have a case he'll want to hear. The young man looked skeptical. Mr. Garrett's very busy. Tell him it involves Victor Roark, an illegal transfer of water rights. Eleanor kept her voice firm. Tell him there's a woman here who rode 2 days to talk to him and won't leave until she does. The young man blinked. Then he stood and disappeared through a door. Eleanor heard low voices. A moment later, the door opened again. Mr. Garrett will see you now. The office was lined with law books and smelled like tobacco and old paper. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, watching her with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Mercer, Eleanor Mercer. Thomas Garrett. He gestured to a chair. My assistant says you mentioned Victor Roark. You have my attention. Eleanor sat and laid out the whole story. The ranch, the debt, The collateral agreement, the sudden acceleration of the water rights transfer. She spoke clearly, precisely, giving him every detail she could remember. Garrett listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. You understand what you're asking me to do? Roark has more money and power than anyone in the territory. He owns judges. He owns banks. Taking him on isn't just difficult. It's professional suicide. Then why are you still listening? A smile ghosted across Garrett's face. Because I'm old enough not to care about suicide anymore. And because Roark took something from me once, a client I couldn't protect. I've wanted a crack at him for 10 years. Eleanor felt hope flicker. So you'll take the case? On one condition, I need to see all your documents, the original loan agreement, the collateral paperwork, everything. If there's a legal angle, I'll find it, but I need the truth, Mrs. Mercer, all of it. You'll have it. And my fee? I can't pay much up front, but if we win, you'll get a percentage of the land value, and I have these. Eleanor pulled out the velvet pouch and set it on his desk. They're not worth much, but Garrett waved her off. Keep your jewelry. If I take this case, it's because I want to beat Roark, not because I need your mother's pearls. He stood. Go back to your ranch. Send me every document you have. I'll review them and let you know if we've got a chance. Eleanor stood too. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We might lose. We might, but at least we'll fight. Garrett's smile turned real this time. I like you, Mrs. Mercer. You remind me why I became a lawyer in the first place. He walked her to the door. Give me 2 weeks. I'll send word. Eleanor left Phoenix the next morning, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. It wasn't much, just a chance. But chances were all she'd ever asked for. The ride back felt shorter, even though her body protested every mile. She pushed through exhaustion, driven by the need to get home. To tell Mercer they had an ally, to see his face when he realized they weren't alone anymore. She arrived at sunset on the 4th day, just as she'd promised. The ranch looked the same, small, weathered, defiant against the endless land. But as she rode closer, she noticed something wrong. The barn door was open. Mercer never left the barn door open at night. Eleanor dismounted and pulled the rifle from the saddle. Her hands were steady despite the fear climbing her spine. She moved quietly toward the house, every sense alert. The front door was ajar. Through the gap, she could see lamplight flickering. She pushed the door open slowly. The house had been ransacked. Not destroyed, but searched. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered. The ledger lay open on the floor, pages torn. Mercer? Her voice cracked. No answer. Eleanor moved through the house room by room, rifle raised. Empty, all of it empty. She went to the barn. The horses were there, nervous but unharmed. No sign of struggle, no blood. But Mercer was gone. She stood in the yard and tried to think through the panic. Someone had come, searched the house, taken him. Or he'd left on his own, chasing whoever had broken in. Then she saw it, caught on a fence post near the barn, fluttering in the evening breeze. A piece of paper. Eleanor walked over and pulled it free. The message was short, written in crude block letters. North pasture. Midnight. Come alone, or he dies. Her blood went ice cold. Roark. It had to be. He'd taken Mercer to force her hand, to make her give up the fight. Eleanor looked at the horizon where the sun was bleeding out across the sky. She had 6 hours until midnight. 6 hours to decide if she was going to walk into a trap or watch Mercer die. The smart thing would be to ride for the sheriff, get help, come back with a posse. But the sheriff was Roark's man, and 6 hours wasn't enough time to reach town and get back. Eleanor went inside and reloaded the rifle. She checked the revolver Mercer kept in the bedroom drawer, made sure it was loaded too. Then she sat at the table and forced herself to eat, to drink water. She'd need her strength. As darkness fell, she moved around the house collecting anything that might help. Matches, a knife, the rope from the barn. She dressed in her darkest clothes and braided her hair tight. At 11:30, she saddled the horse and rode north. The pasture stretched out under a half moon, all shadows and silver light. Eleanor could see the old foundation where Mercer's father had tried to build his house. Just stones now, marking the place where dreams had burned. Beyond it, Near the spring, 3 men stood waiting. She recognized 2 of them from Roark's earlier visits. The third was Mercer, hands tied behind his back, blood on his face. Eleanor rode closer and stopped about 20 yards out, close enough to see, far enough to run if she had to. "Let him go," she called. One of Roark's men laughed. "You don't give orders here, lady. Where's Roark? Too much of a coward to do his own dirty work? Mr. Roark don't dirty his hands with trash like you." The man spat. "He just wants you to understand something. This land, it's his, always has been. Your husband's daddy knew it. Now you're going to know it too. We're fighting the transfer. We have a lawyer. Don't matter what lawyer you got. The water's ours come morning, and if you keep pushing, if you keep fighting—" He jerked his head toward Mercer. "Accidents happen. Fires start. People disappear. You understand?" Eleanor understood perfectly. This wasn't about the law. It was about fear, about breaking them so thoroughly they'd never fight back. "Let him go," she said again. Her voice was steady. "You've made your point." "Have we?" The man pulled a flask from his pocket and unscrewed it. The smell of kerosene hit Eleanor even from 20 yards away. "I don't think we have." He poured kerosene on the ground near the foundation. The other man did the same, creating a wide circle. Eleanor's heart hammered. They were going to burn it. Burn the place where Mercer's father had died. Make them watch. The first man pulled out a match. Eleanor didn't think. She just moved. She yanked the rifle up and fired. The shot went wide. She'd been aiming for his hand but hit the flask instead. Kerosene exploded in a spray. The man screamed and stumbled back. The match fell. Fire erupted. It spread fast, fed by the kerosene running along the circle they'd poured. Flames leaped up, throwing wild shadows. The men scrambled away from the heat. In the chaos, Mercer threw himself backward, rolled, came up with his hands still tied but moving. Eleanor spurred her horse forward. The animal balked at the fire, but she forced it through a gap in the flames. She reached Mercer and leaned down, grabbing his arm. He got his feet under him and swung up behind her, awkward with bound hands. "Go!" he shouted. She kicked the horse hard. They burst through the fire line on the other side, smoke choking, heat searing. Behind them, the men were yelling, trying to organize. One of them raised a gun. Eleanor heard the shot, felt the horse stumble. Not hit, just terrified. She kept it moving through sheer will. They crashed into the darkness beyond the pasture and didn't stop. Eleanor let the horse run until its sides heaved and foam flecked its mouth. Then she pulled up near a stand of scrub and slid down, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Mercer was down a second later. "Cut me loose." Eleanor pulled the knife from her belt and sawed through the ropes. The moment his hands were free, Mercer grabbed her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No. You?" "I'm fine." He looked back toward the pasture where orange light still flickered. They were going to burn it, all of it. "I know." "You came anyway." "Of course I did." Eleanor met his eyes. "You're my husband." Something passed between them then, something that had been building for months and finally broke through. Mercer pulled her close and kissed her, hard and desperate and real. Eleanor kissed him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mercer rested his forehead against hers. "We can't go back to the house tonight. They'll come looking." "Where then?" "Henderson's place. It's closer." He helped her back onto the horse. "We'll get the sheriff, get a posse, bring them to the pasture before Roark's men can clean up the evidence." "The sheriff won't help." "He will when half the county sees what Roark tried to do." Mercer swung up behind her. This time they went too far. This time there'll be witnesses. They rode hard through the night. Eleanor's mind raced. The fire, the threat, the kiss. Everything was changing too fast to process. But one thing was clear. They'd crossed a line, both of them, and there was no going back. When they reached Henderson's ranch an hour before dawn, Eleanor slid off the horse and nearly collapsed. Mercer caught her. "Easy. You've been riding for days." "I'm all right." "You're not, but you're stubborn enough to pretend you are." He helped her to the porch. "Henderson, wake up." Lights came on. The door flew open. Henderson stood there in his nightshirt, shotgun in hand. When he saw them, bloody, smoke-stained, exhausted, his expression went hard. What happened? Mercer told him, fast and brutal. When he got to the part about the fire, Henderson swore. That son of a... He turned and yelled into the house. Martha, get up. We're riding to town. Now? Now. Henderson looked at Eleanor. You stay here. Rest. We'll handle this. No. Eleanor straightened despite the exhaustion pulling at her. I'm going. I'm the one who saw it. I'm the one who has to tell it. Henderson looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Eleanor's face stopped him. All right, but you ride in the wagon. You look half dead already. They reached town as the sun broke over the horizon. The sheriff's office was still dark, but Henderson pounded on the door until a light came on inside. The sheriff, a heavy man named Douglas, opened the door looking annoyed. The annoyance vanished when he saw the crowd. What's this about? Attempted murder, Mercer said flatly. Roark's men tried to burn us out. They had kerosene. They had matches. If my wife hadn't stopped them, I'd be dead. Douglas's face went carefully blank. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and we can prove it. Henderson stepped forward. The fire's still burning up at the north pasture. You can see the kerosene. See where they poured it. See what they tried to do. Could have been an accident. It wasn't an accident, Eleanor said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. I was there. I heard them threaten us. I saw them pour the kerosene. I shot the flask out of one man's hand when he tried to light it. You'll find his burned clothes, his skin. The evidence is there if you're willing to look. Douglas stared at her. Mrs. Mercer, are you Roark's man, Sheriff, or are you the law? Eleanor held his gaze. Because right now, you get to choose. You can pretend this didn't happen, and everyone will know you're bought, or you can do your job. The silence stretched. Then Douglas grabbed his hat. Let's ride. They went north in force. The sheriff, his deputy, Henderson, Mercer, Eleanor, and half a dozen others who'd heard the commotion and joined in. By the time they reached the pasture, the sun was fully up. The evidence was undeniable. Scorch marks in a perfect circle, burned patches where kerosene had spilled, and one of Roark's men, the one Eleanor had shot, sitting slumped against a rock with burns on his hands and face. The sheriff arrested him on the spot. Where's Roark? Mercer demanded. I ain't saying nothing without a lawyer. You don't need to. Douglas hauled the man to his feet. We'll get your story down in town, and if it matches what these folks are saying, you're looking at attempted murder charges. They rode back to town in a grim procession. Eleanor sat in the wagon, watching the land roll by, and felt something shift inside her. They'd won this round. Maybe not the war, but this battle. She looked at Mercer riding beside the wagon. He met her eyes and nodded once. They were still standing, still fighting, and they weren't done yet. News of the arrest spread through town like wildfire. By noon, half the territory knew that Victor Roark's man was sitting in a cell, charged with attempted murder. The other half knew by sunset. Eleanor sat in the sheriff's office, giving her statement for the third time. Her hand cramped from writing, her voice had gone hoarse, but she kept going. Every detail mattered. Every word was ammunition. Sheriff Douglas read through her account, his expression unreadable. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at her. You realize what you're starting here, Mrs. Mercer? I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing what Roark started 30 years ago. He's got resources, connections, the best lawyers money can buy. Then it's a good thing I found one who hates him. Eleanor met his eyes. Are you going to charge him or not? Douglas was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. His man already confessed, said Roark ordered him to scare you off. Didn't mention murder, but arson's enough to hold him. He paused. As for Roark himself, that's harder. He'll claim he never gave such orders. Say his man went rogue. So he walks free? Not free. Just careful. Douglas leaned back. But here's the thing. Once this goes to trial, everything comes out. The water rights, the bank deal, all the ways he's been squeezing you. Public's not going to like that. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. Not victory, not yet, but possibility. When's the trial? Month? Maybe 6 weeks? Judge has to come through from Prescott. That's after the water rights transfer. Can't help that. Law moves slow. Eleanor stood, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. Mercer was waiting outside, leaning against the hitching post. He straightened when he saw her. How'd it go? They're holding Roark's man. Trial in a month. She paused. But the water rights transfer still happens in 2 weeks unless Garrett can stop it. We need to get him those documents. I know. Eleanor looked at the sky, late afternoon sun, the light going gold. We should get back to the ranch, see what damage they did. They rode home in silence, both too tired to talk. When they reached the property, Eleanor's stomach sank. The house looked worse in daylight, drawers still pulled out, papers everywhere. Someone had been searching for something specific. What do you think they wanted? Mercer asked, surveying the mess. Proof. Evidence. Something they could use to discredit us. Eleanor started picking up papers. Or maybe they were looking for the loan documents, trying to destroy them before we could use them in court. Did they get them? No, I took the originals to Phoenix, left copies here. She gathered the scattered pages. But they don't know that. They spent the rest of the evening cleaning, restoring order. It was past midnight when Eleanor finally collapsed into bed, still wearing her clothes, too exhausted to even take off her boots. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory crashed back. The fire, the arrest, coming home to chaos. She dragged herself out of bed and found Mercer at the stove frying eggs. You cooked? Don't sound so surprised. I can manage breakfast. He slid eggs onto 2 plates. Figured you could use the sleep. Eleanor sat and ate without tasting anything. Her mind was already racing ahead, making lists. I need to send those documents to Garrett today, and we need to figure out how to keep the ranch running if the water rights transfer goes through. Can't run cattle without year-round water. Then we run something else, sheep maybe, or we lease grazing rights to someone else and focus on crops. Mercer set down his fork. Eleanor, sheep ranching takes capital we don't have. And the soil here, it's not good for much except scrub grass. Then we make it good. We dig irrigation, we fertilize, we work harder. She met his eyes. I didn't come this far to quit because something's difficult. I know you didn't. Mercer reached across the table and took her hand. I'm just saying, we need to be realistic. Even if Garrett stops the transfer, even if Roark's man goes to prison, we're still broke. We're still one bad season from losing everything. So what do you want to do? Sell to Roark and walk away? No, but... He stopped, frustrated. I don't know. I've been fighting this for so long, I forgot what winning even looks like. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Winning looks like waking up here tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after until this place is ours, free and clear. She paused. We're not going to do it overnight, but we're going to do it. Mercer looked at her like she was something he couldn't quite believe in but wanted to. How are you so sure? Because I already lost everything once. I know what that feels like, and I know this feels different. She stood and started clearing plates. Now stop moping and help me pack those documents. Stage leaves for Phoenix at noon. They worked together through the morning, organizing papers, making copies, preparing everything Garrett would need. Eleanor wrote a letter explaining the arrest, the attempted arson, the timeline. She kept her language precise, factual. No emotion, just facts. By 11:30, she was ready. Mercer drove her into town in the wagon, neither of them speaking much. When they reached the stage office, he helped her down. How long before we hear back from Garrett? Week, maybe 2. He said he'd move fast once he had the documents. Eleanor adjusted her shawl. In the meantime, we keep working. Keep our heads down. Don't give Roark any more ammunition. Eleanor, Mercer hesitated. Last night, at the pasture, We'll talk about that later. Her voice was gentle but firm. When this is over. When we can breathe without looking over our shoulders. He nodded. All right. The stage pulled up in a cloud of dust. Eleanor handed her package to the driver with explicit instructions about delivery and payment. Then she turned back to Mercer. 2 weeks. One way or another, we'll know where we stand. I'll be waiting. She climbed into the wagon and they rode home, the afternoon sun beating down. Eleanor felt the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones, but underneath it was something else, something that felt almost like peace. They'd taken their shot. Now all they could do was wait. The next 10 days crawled by. Eleanor threw herself into ranch work, helping Mercer repair fences and tend the cattle they had left. Her hands blistered and her back ached, but she welcomed the physical pain. It gave her something to focus on besides the waiting. On the 8th day, a rider came. Eleanor saw him from the barn and felt her heart kick up. The rider wore a suit, dusty from travel, but still a suit, official. She walked out to meet him. Mercer appeared from the pasture, moving fast. "Mrs. Mercer?" The rider dismounted. "I have a telegram from Thomas Garrett in Phoenix." Eleanor took the envelope with shaking hands. She tore it open and read. The words blurred. She read them again to make sure she understood. "What does it say?" Mercer asked. Eleanor looked up at him, and for the first time in months, she smiled, really smiled. He found something, an error in the collateral agreement. The bank didn't file the proper paperwork with the Territorial Land Office, which means the transfer isn't legal, Mercer finished. "Not yet. Garrett's filing an injunction. If the judge grants it, the transfer is frozen until a full hearing." Eleanor's hands were still shaking. "We have a chance." The rider cleared his throat. "Mr. Garrett also sent word that you should expect Roark to fight this hard. He says to be prepared for anything." Eleanor nodded. "Tell Mr. Garrett we're ready." The rider left. Eleanor and Mercer stood in the yard, the telegram between them like a lifeline. "This could actually work," Mercer said quietly. "It's going to work." Eleanor folded the telegram carefully. "We are not losing this ranch, not to Roark, not to anyone." That night they ate supper together, and for the first time in weeks, the conversation wasn't about debts or threats or survival. They talked about small things, what to plant in the garden next spring, whether to repair the barn roof or rebuild it entirely. Normal things, future things. Eleanor washed the dishes while Mercer sat at the table going through the ledger. She glanced over and caught him watching her. "What?" "Nothing, just..." He shook his head. "You look different than when you first arrived." "Older?" "Stronger, like you belong here." Eleanor dried her hands on the towel. "I do belong here." Mercer stood and crossed to her. He took the towel from her hands and set it aside. Then he cupped her face and kissed her, slow and deliberate this time. Not desperate, just real. When they broke apart, Eleanor was breathing hard. "I meant what I said," Mercer told her. "This stopped being business a long time ago." "I know." "So what do we do about it?" Eleanor thought about the question, about everything that had brought her here, loss and desperation and a stranger's blunt proposal, about how that desperation had turned into something else, something that felt like home. "We figure it out," she said finally. "After, when we're sure we get to keep this place. And if we don't, then we figure it out anyway." She reached up and touched his face. "I'm not going anywhere, Mercer. Win or lose, I'm staying." He pulled her close and held her, and Eleanor let herself have this moment. Let herself believe they might actually make it. The injunction came through 3 days later. Judge Wallace granted a temporary freeze on the water rights transfer, pending a full evidentiary hearing in 6 weeks. The news hit town like a thunderclap. Eleanor was in the general store when she heard women whispering. "Did you hear? The judge sided with the Mercers." "Against Roark? That's suicide." "Or bravery, depends how it turns out." Eleanor kept her face neutral and finished her shopping, but inside she was burning with fierce satisfaction. They'd drawn blood. Roark wasn't invincible. She was loading supplies into the wagon when a voice stopped her cold. "Mrs. Mercer." She turned. Victor Roark stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like a man without a care. But his eyes were hard. "Mr. Roark, quite a mess you've stirred up." He smiled without warmth. "Filing injunctions, dragging my name through the mud, all over a piece of dirt that's barely worth the taxes." "If it's barely worth anything, why do you want it so badly?" "Principle. I don't like being told no." "Then I imagine you've had a difficult life." Roark's smile sharpened. "You're clever, I'll give you that. Cleverer than your husband, certainly, but clever only gets you so far." Eleanor set down the flour sack she was holding. Is there something you want, Mr. Roark? Or did you just come to make threats? No threats, just facts. He stepped closer. You think stopping the water rights transfer is a victory? All you've done is delay the inevitable. The bank will foreclose eventually. Your husband can't make the payments, and when he defaults, I'll be there to buy the whole property for pennies on the dollar. We're not defaulting. Everyone defaults, Mrs. Mercer. It's just a matter of time. He tipped his hat. Enjoy your temporary victory. I'll see you in 6 weeks. He walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in the street with her hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something. Instead, she loaded the rest of the supplies and drove home. Mercer was waiting when she arrived. One look at her face, and he knew. Roark? In town, making sure I know he's still coming for us. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon. He says even if we win the injunction hearing, we'll default on the loan anyway. He's not wrong. Then we make sure he is. Eleanor started unloading supplies. How much do we owe the bank right now? Total? Mercer told her. The number was staggering, but not impossible. Not quite. And how much can we raise if we sell everything that's not essential? The extra equipment, the spare horses, anything we can live without? Maybe a third of what we owe, maybe less. Then we find the rest somewhere else. Eleanor's mind was racing. The collective cattle drive worked once. We do it again, bigger this time. We bring in ranchers from 3 counties, pool resources, drive to California if we have to. Eleanor, organizing something like that takes months. Then we have months. She met his eyes. The hearing is in 6 weeks. The bank payment is due in 4 months. That's time. Not much, but enough if we work smart. Mercer stared at her. You really think we can do this? I think we have to try. What's the alternative? Give up? She shook her head. I didn't marry you to watch you surrender, and I didn't fight this hard to lose now. Something shifted in Mercer's expression, the last remnants of doubt burning away. All right, tell me what you need. Paper. Names of every rancher within 50 miles, and a pot of coffee. We're going to be up late. They worked through the night, drafting letters, making lists, calculating numbers. By dawn, Eleanor had a plan sketched out. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it was a plan. Over the next 3 weeks, they rode to every ranch in the territory. Some ranchers said yes immediately, others took convincing. A few flat out refused, afraid of crossing Roark. But slowly, carefully, Eleanor built her coalition. Henderson was in. So were the Pratts, the Jamesons, the Carvers. By the end of the 3rd week, she had commitments from 15 ranchers representing nearly 300 head of cattle. It's not enough, Mercer said, looking at her projections. Even if we sell every head for top dollar, we'll still be short. Then we'll figure something out. Eleanor's voice was steady. We always do. The hearing date loomed closer. Garrett sent word that he was coming to town 3 days early to prepare. Eleanor read his letter twice, looking for reassurance she didn't quite find. He says the case is strong, but not guaranteed, she told Mercer. Everything hinges on proving the bank acted in bad faith when they accelerated the transfer. Can we prove that? Garrett thinks so. He's got testimony from other ranchers who say Roark pressured the bank to call in loans. If we can establish a pattern, Mercer set down his coffee. I'm tired of ifs, Eleanor. I want certainty. There is no certainty. There's just the fight. She reached across the table. But we're still standing. That counts for something. The night before the hearing, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome. They could win the injunction and still lose the ranch. They could lose the hearing and have nothing. They could win everything and still be one disaster away from ruin. She got up and went to the window. Outside, the land stretched away into darkness. Her land now. Hers and Mercer's. Worth fighting for not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was theirs. The door creaked. Mercer stood in the doorway. Can't sleep either? No. He crossed to stand beside her. They looked out at the darkness together, two people who'd started as strangers and become something more complex than either had anticipated. Whatever happens tomorrow, Mercer started, we'll deal with it. I know. But I want to say thank you for staying, for fighting, for being more than I expected. Eleanor turned to look at him. You're welcome. But Mercer, I didn't do this for you. I did it for me. Because this place became mine the moment I decided it was worth saving. I know, that's why it matters. He kissed her then, and Eleanor kissed him back. And for the first time since marrying him, she let herself admit what she'd been avoiding for months. She loved him. Not the desperate love of her youth, all fire and poetry, but something steadier, deeper. The kind of love built on shared battles and quiet trust. They stayed at the window until the sky began to lighten. Then they dressed and prepared for war. The courthouse was packed. Eleanor sat in the front row, Mercer beside her, Garrett on her other side. Across the aisle, Roark sat with his lawyers. 3 of them, all expensive suits and confident smiles. Judge Wallace entered and everyone stood. He was older, white-haired, with a face that gave nothing away. He took his seat and surveyed the room. This is a hearing on an injunction filed by Thomas Garrett on behalf of Cole and Eleanor Mercer, contesting the transfer of water rights from First Bank of Prescott to Victor Roark. Mr. Garrett, you may begin. Garrett stood. For the next hour, he laid out their case with surgical precision. The missing paperwork, the suspicious timing, the pattern of Roark using the bank to squeeze out competition. He called witnesses, ranchers who'd lost their land under similar circumstances, the bank manager who stumbled through questions about why the transfer was accelerated. Roark's lawyers fought back hard. They produced documents showing the transfer was legal under territorial law. They argued that the Mercers were simply trying to avoid paying legitimate debts. They painted Eleanor and Mercer as troublemakers trying to game the system. Eleanor sat through it all, hands clenched in her lap. Every accusation landed like a blow. But she didn't flinch, didn't look away. When it was her turn to testify, she stood and walked to the witness stand with her head high. Garrett asked her about the night of the fire. Eleanor answered clearly, describing everything she'd seen. The kerosene, the threats. The moment she'd shot the flask, and everything exploded into chaos. And what did you think in that moment, Mrs. Mercer? Garrett asked. I thought they were going to kill my husband, and I thought if I didn't do something, we'd lose everything we'd worked for. So you acted? Yes. Why? You could have run, saved yourself. Eleanor looked directly at Roark. Because running doesn't solve anything, it just means you lose somewhere else. Roark's lead lawyer cross-examined her, trying to poke holes in her story. But Eleanor had told the truth, and the truth held. When she stepped down, Mercer squeezed her hand. You did good. The hearing lasted all day. By the time Judge Wallace called for a recess to consider his ruling, Eleanor felt wrung out. They stepped outside into late afternoon sun. How do you think it went? Mercer asked Garrett. Hard to say. Wallace is fair, but he's also cautious. He won't want to rule against the bank without solid evidence. We gave him evidence. We gave him questions. Whether they're enough? Garrett shrugged. We'll know soon. They waited. An hour. Then 2. Eleanor paced the courthouse steps, unable to sit still. Other ranchers gathered, offering support. Henderson clapped Mercer on the shoulder. The Pratt's wife brought Eleanor water. Finally, the bailiff emerged. Judge is ready. They filed back inside. Judge Wallace looked tired. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today. This case raises serious questions about the relationship between First Bank of Prescott and Mr. Roark, and whether proper procedures were followed in accelerating the collateral transfer. Eleanor's heart hammered. However, I'm not convinced the Mercers have demonstrated sufficient immediate harm to warrant a permanent injunction. The bank has a legal right to protect its interests, and the territorial statutes governing collateral transfers are clear. Her heart sank. That said, Wallace continued, there are enough irregularities in the documentation to warrant further investigation. Therefore, I'm extending the temporary injunction for 90 days, during which time the Territorial Land Office will audit the bank's records. If irregularities are found, the transfer will be voided. If not, it proceeds. He banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Roark's lawyers were on their feet, objecting. Garrett was shaking Mercer's hand. Eleanor just sat, trying to process what had happened. They'd won, Sort of. They had 90 days, 3 more months. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Outside, Mercer pulled her aside. 90 days? That's time for 2 more cattle drives, maybe 3 if we push hard. And time for the audit to find what Garrett thinks is there. Eleanor looked at him. We're not done yet. No, but we're still standing. Yeah, we are. They rode home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Eleanor watched the land roll by and felt something settle inside her. This wasn't over. Might not be over for years. But they had time now. They had a chance. And sometimes a chance was all you needed. The 90 days stretched ahead like a lifeline thrown to drowning people, just enough to grab onto, not enough to guarantee survival. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table the morning after the hearing, spreading out papers and recalculating numbers she'd already calculated a dozen times. Mercer came in from feeding the horses and found her hunched over the ledger, pencil moving fast. You've been at that since before sunrise. Couldn't sleep. Eleanor didn't look up. I keep running the numbers and they don't add up the way I need them to. How short are we? With the 2 cattle drives we can manage in 90 days, still about $800 short of what we need to clear the debt and buy back the water rights. She set the pencil down. 800 might as well be 8,000. We don't have it. Mercer poured coffee and sat across from her. What if we don't buy back the rights? What if we just pay down enough debt that the bank can't foreclose? Then Roark still gets the water eventually, and without it, we can't run cattle year-round. We're back where we started, slowly dying instead of quickly. Eleanor rubbed her eyes. There has to be something we're missing, some way to make this work. Or maybe, Mercer stopped. What? Maybe we accept that we can't win everything. We keep the ranch, lose the water rights, and figure out how to survive differently. He held up a hand before she could protest. I know that's not what you want to hear, but Eleanor, we've already won more than I thought possible. We're still here. Roark's man is in jail. The bank is being audited. That's not nothing. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to insist they could still have it all, but exhaustion was catching up with her, wearing down her certainty. You're right, it's not nothing. She closed the ledger. But I'm not ready to give up the water yet. Not until that 90 days runs out. Then we won't. The first cattle drive happened 3 weeks later. Eleanor rode with them this time, refusing to stay behind. Mercer tried to talk her out of it, said it was too hard, too dangerous for a woman who'd barely ridden before coming to Arizona. She ignored him and saddled her horse anyway. The drive was brutal. 5 days on the trail, sleeping on hard ground, eating dust and jerky. Eleanor's body screamed at her to stop. She kept going. When they reached the buyers in Tucson, she negotiated prices while Mercer and the other ranchers rested, got them an extra $3 a head by refusing to budge until the buyer met her terms. You're tougher than half the men I know, Henderson told her on the ride back. I'm just too stubborn to quit. Same thing, near as I can tell. They made it home with enough money to cover another 2 months of bank payments. Eleanor added it to their savings and recalculated. Still short, still fighting uphill. A week later, Thomas Garrett sent word that the territorial audit had uncovered something interesting. The bank had no record of filing the required documentation with the land office for any of their collateral transfers in the past 5 years. Not just the Mercer's case, but dozens of others. It was a bureaucratic mess that suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate fraud. This is good, right? Mercer asked, reading Garrett's letter over Eleanor's shoulder. It's complicated. The missing paperwork means all those transfers are legally questionable, but it also means the land office has to sort through 5 years of records to figure out what's valid and what's not. Eleanor set the letter down. Garrett says it could take months, maybe longer. We don't have months. I know. Eleanor stood and paced to the window. But it puts pressure on the bank. They're facing questions from the territory now, not just us. That's leverage. Leverage for what? For negotiating a better deal. If the bank is worried about looking corrupt, they might be willing to renegotiate our terms to make this go away quietly. Mercer frowned. You want to make a deal with them? I want to survive. If that means making a deal, then yes. Eleanor turned to face him. We can't win by force, Mercer. Roark has too much money, too much power. But we can win by making it more expensive for him to fight than to let us go. Understanding dawned on Mercer's face. You want to make ourselves too much trouble to be worth it. Exactly. Over the next month, Eleanor put her plan into motion. She wrote letters to the territorial governor's office, documenting Roark's pattern of using the bank to acquire land. She contacted a reporter from the Phoenix newspaper who'd been asking questions about corruption in the territory. She made noise, careful, strategic noise, designed to make Roark's life difficult. The response came faster than she expected. She was in town picking up supplies when a lawyer she didn't recognize approached her. Mrs. Mercer, my name is Robert Chen. I represent the First Bank of Prescott. Eleanor's guard went up immediately. I have legal representation, Mr. Chen. Anything you need to discuss should go through Thomas Garrett. This isn't a legal matter. It's a business proposition. He gestured to the hotel across the street. Could we speak privately? 5 minutes of your time. Every instinct told Eleanor to refuse, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes. They sat in the hotel lobby, Eleanor perched on the edge of her chair, ready to leave at the first sign of trouble. Chen pulled out a folder. The bank is prepared to offer you a revised loan agreement. We'll extend your repayment period by 3 years, reduce your interest rate by 2%, and return the water rights to you free and clear. Eleanor's heart kicked up. In exchange for what? Your silence. You drop all complaints to the territorial government. You stop talking to reporters. You sign a confidentiality agreement stating you won't discuss the bank's business practices publicly. He slid the folder across to her. It's a generous offer, Mrs. Mercer. More generous than you have any right to expect. Eleanor opened the folder and scanned the documents. The terms were good. Better than good. They were exactly what she needed to save the ranch, which meant they were desperate. How long do I have to consider this? 48 hours. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with the original agreement. Eleanor closed the folder and stood. I'll discuss it with my husband and our lawyer. You'll have an answer in 2 days. She walked out before Chen could respond, the folder clutched tight against her chest. Her mind was racing. This was it, the lifeline she'd been fighting for. But something about it felt wrong, too easy, too convenient. She found Mercer in the barn when she got home and told him everything. So we take it, right? He looked at the paperwork. This is what we've been working toward. 3 more years means we can actually pay off the debt, get the water back, everything. Maybe. Eleanor sat on a hay bale. Or maybe it's a trap. We sign away our right to speak out and Roark finds some other way to take the land once we're quiet. You don't trust it. I don't trust anything that comes this easy. She looked at him. What do you think we should do? Mercer was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I think I'm tired, Eleanor. I'm tired of fighting, tired of waking up every day wondering if this is the day we lose everything. He met her eyes. If this deal is real, if it actually gives us a chance to keep this place, I want to take it, even if it means staying quiet about what they did. Eleanor understood. She was tired too, bone-deep, soul-weary tired. The kind of tired that made compromise look like wisdom. All right, I'll send the paperwork to Garrett, get his opinion, but if he says it's legitimate, we take it. Garrett's response came by telegram the next day. He'd reviewed the contract and found no obvious traps. The terms were binding on both sides. If the bank failed to honor them, the Mercers could sue. It was, in his professional opinion, a genuine offer. Eleanor read the telegram 3 times, looking for the catch she knew had to be there. But Garrett was good at his job. If he said it was clean, it probably was. She showed Mercer the telegram at supper that night. So we're really doing this, he said. Looks like it. How do you feel about it? Eleanor thought about the question. How did she feel? Relief. Suspicion. A strange sense of anticlimactic disappointment that the fight was ending not with a dramatic victory, but with a business transaction. I feel like we survived, she said finally. That's enough. They signed the papers the next morning. Chen witnessed the signatures and handed over copies of the revised loan agreement and the deed transferring the water rights back to the Mercers. Then he shook their hands and left. Eleanor stood in the yard holding the documents and felt nothing. No triumph, no joy, just exhaustion and a vague sense of disbelief. "Is it really over?" Mercer asked. "I don't know. Ask me in 3 years when the debt's actually paid." But 2 weeks later, something happened that made it feel real. The territorial auditors released their report on the First Bank of Prescott. The findings were damning: years of missing paperwork, questionable collateral transfers, evidence of preferential treatment for certain clients. The report stopped short of accusing anyone of criminal fraud, but it recommended a full investigation and potential restructuring of the bank's leadership. Within a month, the bank's president resigned. 2 senior loan officers were dismissed, and Victor Roark quietly sold his shares in the institution. Eleanor heard the news from Henderson, who heard it from his wife, who heard it at the general store. She didn't celebrate, just filed the information away and went back to work. But that night, sitting at the table with Mercer, she allowed herself a small smile. "We did that," she said quietly. "What?" "The audit, the investigation. That was us. We made enough noise that they couldn't ignore it anymore." Mercer looked at her. "You think Rourke's actually going to leave us alone now?" "I think he's going to be too busy covering his own tracks to worry about us." Eleanor leaned back. "And I think we made it too expensive for him to keep fighting. That's as close to winning as we're going to get." Spring came, and with it the second cattle drive. This one went smoother. The routes were established, the buyers knew them, the logistics worked. Eleanor stayed home this time, managing the ranch and keeping the books balanced. When Mercer returned with payment, they were ahead of schedule on the loan for the first time ever. "At this rate, we might pay it off in 2 years instead of 3, Eleanor said, running calculations. "Don't jinx it." But Mercer was smiling. Summer brought work, endless, back-breaking work. They repaired the barn properly this time, replacing the whole roof instead of patching it, fixed the fences, dug irrigation channels to make better use of the spring water they'd fought so hard to keep. The ranch started to look less like a place that was barely surviving and more like a place that might actually thrive. Eleanor planted a real garden, not just vegetables, but flowers too. Wildflowers she'd collected from the hills, transplanted near the house. They didn't all survive, but enough did to add color to the harsh landscape. One evening in late August, she was watering them when Mercer came up behind her. "You know, when I put that advertisement in the paper, I was expecting someone desperate enough to work hard and keep quiet." Eleanor glanced at him. "And instead, you got someone desperate enough to fight your battles and make a lot of noise." "Yeah, not exactly what I ordered." He paused. "But I'm not complaining." "Good. Because you're stuck with me." "I know." Mercer took the watering can from her hands and set it down. "Eleanor, we should talk about what this is. Us." Her pulse quickened. They'd been avoiding this conversation for months, too busy surviving to examine what they were becoming. "All right. What do you want to talk about?" "I want to know if this marriage is still just a business arrangement to you, or if it's become something else." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd offered her survival when she had nothing, who'd fought beside her when he could have given up, who'd become so woven into her life that she couldn't imagine it without him anymore. "It stopped being business a long time ago," she said quietly. "I think you know that." "I wanted to hear you say it." "Why?" "Because I love you, Eleanor, and I need to know if that's something you can say back." He held up a hand. "I'm not expecting poetry. I know that's not who we are, but I need to know where I stand." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Not sadness, just the overwhelming weight of everything they'd been through together. "I love you too. It's not the kind of love I had when I was young. It's harder, more complicated. But it's real." Mercer pulled her close and kissed her, and Eleanor let herself fall into it. Let herself believe that maybe they'd earned this quiet moment, this hard-won peace. They stood in the garden as the sun set, holding each other, and for the first time since Eleanor had arrived in Arizona, she felt like she could breathe. Fall brought the harvest and another successful cattle drive. By the time winter settled in, they'd paid off half the remaining debt. Garrett sent word that the territorial investigation into the bank had resulted in several indictments, though Rourke's name wasn't among them. He'd covered his tracks too well. Eleanor wasn't surprised. Men like Roark didn't go down easy, but they'd weakened him. made him cautious, and in the end, that was victory enough. The years passed, not quickly, not easily, but they passed. Eleanor and Mercer worked the ranch, building it slowly from something that barely survived to something that actually produced. They had setbacks. A drought one year, cattle disease another, but they weathered them together. Other ranchers started coming to Eleanor for advice on managing their finances. She began keeping books for half the valley, charging a small fee that helped pad their savings. Word spread that Eleanor Mercer was sharp with numbers and fair in her dealings. People trusted her. Mercer's reputation changed too. The whispers about violence and danger faded, replaced by respect for a man who'd fought to keep his father's dream alive and won. They never had children. Eleanor was too old by the time things stabilized, and Mercer never pushed for it. But they built a different kind of family. The neighboring ranchers became allies, then friends. Henderson's daughters started calling Eleanor Aunt Eleanor. The Pratts invited them for Sunday dinners. Eleanor found she didn't miss Philadelphia, didn't miss the life she'd lost there. This was better. Harder, but better. 3 years after signing the revised loan agreement, Eleanor made the final payment to the bank. She insisted on delivering it in person, riding into town with Mercer to hand over the cashier's check and receive the deed, free and clear. The bank manager, a new one, hired after the scandal, smiled nervously as he processed the paperwork. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer. You're now the sole owners of your property, with no encumbrances or liens." Eleanor took the deed and held it like it was made of gold. "Thank you." Outside, Mercer pulled her into a fierce hug. "We did it," he said into her hair. "It's really ours." "It was always ours. We just had to prove it." They rode home slowly, savoring the moment. When they reached the ranch, Eleanor dismounted and just stood there, looking at everything they'd built. The house with its new porch, the barn with its solid roof, the fences that no longer leaned, the garden that bloomed year after year. "You know what's funny?" she said. "What?" "When I answered your advertisement, I thought I was settling, taking the only option I had left." Eleanor turned to look at him. "But this? Everything we built, it's more than I ever had back east. More than I dreamed of having." Mercer took her hand. "I offered you survival. You gave us a life. We gave us a life. Together." They stood in the yard they'd defended, on the land they'd fought for, and watched the sun set over property that was finally, completely theirs. 5 more years passed. Eleanor turned 55, then 60. Her hair went gray and her hands developed arthritis that made bookkeeping harder. But she kept at it, kept the ranch running smooth. Mercer's hair went white, and the scars on his back ached in cold weather, but he still worked the land every day, still tended the cattle that now numbered in the hundreds instead of dozens. They heard, through the gossip network that ran through the territory, that Victor Roark had died. Heart attack, sudden and without warning. His empire fragmented among his children, who promptly started fighting over it. Within 2 years, most of his holdings were sold off. Eleanor felt nothing when she heard the news. No satisfaction, no grief. Roark had become irrelevant to her life long ago. She was more interested in other news. Henderson's oldest daughter was getting married and wanted Eleanor to help with the planning. The Pratts were selling their ranch and moving closer to their grandchildren. New families were moving into the valley, bringing fresh energy and ideas. The world kept turning. Life kept happening. One evening in late September, Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sunset. Mercer came out and settled into the chair beside her. "You thinking about something?" he asked. "Just remembering the day I arrived, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I was making a mistake." "Were you?" Eleanor smiled. "Worst decision of my life became the best one I ever made." "Funny how that works." "Not funny, just life." Mercer reached over and took her hand. "I'm glad you answered my advertisement." "So am I." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the land they'd built together fade into twilight. Eleanor thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that stagecoach. 45 years old, desperate, certain her life was over. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't been over. It had just been waiting to begin. The ranch thrived, not through luck or miracle, but through work. through stubbornness, through two people who refused to let circumstances define them. Eleanor never forgot where she'd come from, never forgot what it felt like to stand at the edge of nothing, but she also never dwelled on it. The past was past. What mattered was what she'd built from the ashes. Years later, when a young woman showed up at the ranch asking for work, alone, desperate, running from something she wouldn't name, Eleanor gave her a job without hesitation. "Pays not much," Eleanor told her, "but works hard. But you'll have a roof and food and a chance to start over." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Eleanor thought about a stranger named Cole Mercer offering her marriage before sunset, about betting everything on one brutal choice, about finding home in the last place she expected. "Because someone gave me a chance once," she said simply. "Figured I should pass it on." The young woman stayed, got strong, got steady. Eventually married Henderson's grandson and started building her own life. Eleanor watched it happen and smiled, the cycle continuing. Hope passed from one generation to the next. She lived to be 73. Died in her sleep one winter night, Mercer beside her, the ranch they'd built thriving around them. She'd come to Arizona expecting nothing and left behind everything that mattered. A home, a legacy, proof that you could lose everything and still win. Mercer buried her on the hill overlooking the north pasture, near the spring they'd fought so hard to keep. He lived another 5 years, working the land until his body finally gave out. They buried him beside her. The ranch passed to Henderson's family, who'd promised to keep it running, to remember the two stubborn people who'd built it from nothing. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Arizona hills, people swore they could see two figures on the porch, a man and a woman, sitting together, watching their land fade into twilight. Just shadows and light, probably. Tricks of memory. But maybe something more. Maybe the proof that some bonds don't break, even when everything else does. That some fights are worth fighting, even when you're certain you'll lose. That sometimes, the boldest decision you make at your lowest point becomes the life that proves your strength was never gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to matter.